Before seminary, I worked as the director of a large in-home care agency. It was a rewarding and also hard and stressful job. And at one point, that stress really came to a boiling point. My work, it felt like a weight that I would carry around just to prove that I could. One typical Saturday morning, I was anxiously working away when my partner came to me and put her hand on my hand, and she said, "What are you going to do to be okay?" I was working 70 hours at least in a given week, and that was like a low week. And the more I checked off on my to-do list, the more things that seemed to be added. The more ideas I came up with to fix problems, it felt like the more problems that I had. It was a very heavy weight. And still, Carri, my partner's question, it came as a surprise. Would I be okay? Yoga, I came back at her. I'm going to practice yoga. That's what I'm going to do. Now, I had heard of yoga at this point, but I had never really tried it. The idea of me doing it seemed crazy to most everyone who knew me. My sisters had a very good laugh at the idea that yoga, like, can you even touch your toes? Which I couldn't at the time. But I said that I would do it, so there I was. I had to give it a shot. I found an intro class nearby and I enrolled. The first few sessions were impossible. I felt like an alien in the class and in my body. And then maybe it was like the third class at the end in Shavasana, that is the corpse pose. It all came loose. Tears of release and relief, of grief and also of joy, and tears of loss, the feelings of not being enough, of not having enough, big, wet tears, unstoppable tears, involuntary and saving. The intro class ended, and I enrolled in a level 1 class. Once a week, which before too long became twice a week, and then 3 times a week. And then I went on mornings before I'd go to work, and I attended special workshops. See, the body has its own kinds of habits, things it knows deep down. My body was strong, and I knew that if there was a challenging pose, my muscles could push their way into it one way or another. Strong arms for handstands, strong legs for warrior, stubborn strength for balancing and bending. By this point, I could not only touch my toes, but I could lift my legs up over my head while resting only on my hands, which you might have guessed became a problem. I was deep in my practice, maybe like a year or 2 after I had first found the studio after my partner's question, and I was feeling really proud of myself and the poses I could hold, my breathing technique, the way I could lift myself up and sustain my weight, the way I had proven my sisters wrong. When things took a turn, my right knee started to ache. I had to stop sitting cross-legged in lotus, and I had to modify many of the sitting poses that I had considered long mastered. Even outside of my practice, my knee and its constant pain reminded me that something was not right. I did everything I could to fix it. I saw an acupuncturist. I worked on my hip flexibility, which everybody told me was the real problem. I rested, I waited, and still it ached. One of my teachers suggested that I try a different kind of practice, Anusara yoga. Anusara, you may know, it means flowing with grace. In my first class during handstands, I realized how my yoga practice, like my professional life before that, had gone wrong. My teacher came over to me and I was, handstands. I was upside down, resting on my hands, feeling really strong, working hard, and he whispered towards me with his hand just slightly touching my shoulder. He was very sweet. He said, "Gretchen, your pose needs less muscle and more love." I fell down when he said that, totally crashed. And once I recovered from the embarrassment of my body noisily crashing down in the middle of the yoga class, I got it. Less muscle, more love. Less push, more openness. Less force, more breath. More joy. Less task, more flow. Less struggle, more grace. You probably know the story from the Hebrew Bible about Jacob who wrestled with God. Or maybe it was a man, or maybe it was with an angel. The text is actually not clear. It seems like it could be any of those. To remind you, the story goes that Jacob wrestled all night with this angel God man at the banks of the river Jabbok. He had sent his family on ahead of him with all of his belongings. He'd stayed behind on the other side of the river, and this angel guy just suddenly started wrestling with him. We don't really know why, but the angel guy, God, whatever, was relentless, doing everything he could to get Jacob to give up, to let go. He kicked him hard and he dislocated Jacob's hip, which caused permanent injury. And still Jacob kept wrestling, and he demanded a blessing. When I tell this story, which I do a lot, it's one of my favorites, I often tell it as a story of how important it is to wrestle long enough in the hard places of life for deep change and real transformation that is the blessing to take place. When I tell it, I often say to my congregation, let's companion one another along the riverbanks in our mutual heartbreak and longing, and tell the stories, for they are tales of what we have most cared about, and the ways our hearts have opened and loved and then lost, and then survived. I say, let's hold on together for the blessing. But today, with you, I want to talk about the other side of the story. I want to acknowledge that there is a point, a line where holding on becomes a problem. A point where wrestling causes not goodness, but simply injury, where holding on by will and by force does not bring a blessing, but actually prevents the blessing, or at least prevents you from experiencing the blessing. A point when you and those you love, the world and its wholeness would actually be a whole lot better off if you let go, if you gave up, stopped insisting on staying until you and others were injured, if you asked for help, if you accepted help. I mean, how hard-headed must Jacob have been? How foolish and unnecessary. I mean, his family was already across. What was he trying to prove? That he was in charge? That he could muscle his way through? That he could win? Most of the reasons that any of us end up in unnecessary wrestling matches come down to this kind of muscle over love. We wrestle as a way to control and limit and push and direct. We stay in the struggle because others can't or won't stand in our place, we're pretty sure, not that we'd ask them. We wouldn't want to have our hearts broken if they didn't show up. We wrestle because we feel responsible for the plan, for people, for everything. We wrestle because we cannot abide the messier parts of life, the transitions, the in-between time, the grief and the heartache. And we wrestle because it's all that we know. And we cannot handle what we don't know, what may come after this, even if it means that all we're holding on to, that thing we know, is actually heartburn. And when we're really deep in it, we wrestle because there is one way, the right way. It's my way, and I can get us there if I just keep wrestling. Not that I know anything about that. To say it is hard to know when the hanging on will lead to the blessing, and when the blessing requires letting go, is a profound understatement. My small and recent insight is that discerning the difference requires taking a good hard look at what's behind the holding on or the letting go, and recognizing that when we are wanting to control, or when we're acting out of fear, or when we are overusing our muscles to the point of injury, that may be the problem. Because although love hopes all things, and love endures all things, and love believes all things, love does not control all things, right? Love does not control. And so when we are wrestling to maintain control, it may be time to step back and let go. And some would say, let God. And when we are letting go because we hope to control the otherwise messy, scary feeling, the things of grief and loss, then it might be instead time to hang on a little longer. As an example of this wrestling and letting go, I offer parenting. Children are such a good lesson in realizing how little control we have, which has not prevented me from wrestling as if I was in charge and I could win everything. My children, in turn, of course, respond to my wrestling attempts with their strong muscles and wrestle right back, especially now that they are teenagers. And then we all just end up getting injured with no blessing in sight. But when, instead of wrestling, instead of hanging on very tightly, I breathe and listen and refuse to wrestle, and instead just try to make room for love and grace, then there is more blessing than I could ever imagine. Another example, I offer marriage. See, I'm at the age where a lot of my close friends have been wrestling in their marriage, often for a really long time, because I have come to realize that it can be torture to watch your friends flounder in the depths of holding on to a relationship after it has in fact ended. I hear stories today about people too willing to give up on marriage, but that is not what I've seen in my friends. I've seen instead fierce commitment, trying against all odds to wrestle life out of the ashes. And in the wrestling, I've seen such despair and mutual injury, shame, blame, until the point of hopelessness. In these moments, I have prayed for my friends, not that they'd stick with it, but that they'd give up, that they'd let go. Now, I don't pray that the relationship will be undone, of course, but more that they will see that the relationship as they have understood it up till that point is already gone. And only by releasing that, by releasing themselves from making that happen, can anything else, anything at all, happen in its place. The possibilities are endless once that space is made, once they let go and stop fighting. Our faith says that truth is ever unfolding, which means that life is at work on life all the time. And something new is being built beyond our wildest imaginations if we just make space for such sweet possibility, space to see and partner with such new possibility. If we can just release less muscle, more love. Ever since that yoga class, it's been about 20 years now, that phrase has been a mantra for my life and probably can be traced to the roots of what sent me to seminary, to keep practicing less muscle, more love. And still so often I forget. I totally fail. Like in my handstand, I fall over and I have to try again. Because like many of us, I was not raised to believe that life is at work on life, but rather that if anything was going to happen, I have to make it happen. Life depends on it. It may take collaboration with others, but over time, with persistent hard work, as we sometimes sing, we will build a land that will bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free. We will. If we just work hard enough, stay in the struggle long enough, we can make the blessing happen. We will. I will. A number of years back, as my congregation prepared for its interim time, I saw this temptation for too much muscle more than once in myself and in my congregation. The temptation to control what is not controllable, to hold on when the time is right instead for letting go, or to carry the struggle all on your own to try to fix stuff in ways that prevent the blessing of others from showing up and helping out, or the blessing of a whole new thing from taking shape. But the interim time is a time in our congregations of intentional chaos. Control is like the opposite of the point. It is supposed to feel unsettling. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable. I knew this. My congregation, we knew this going into the interim. And still, it was so hard not to wish for stability, hard not to believe that we should just stay put on this side of the river, hard not to hang on to even those things that we haven't even liked all that much, our heartburn, because it is ours and it tells us who we are. And it is hard not to use our muscles to hang on and just hang on. But there's no blessing in that. The blessing comes in the breathing, the releasing, the trusting, and the letting go. The blessing comes in the love. The blessing comes not in the muscle. It comes in the love. So in the midst of this great unknown time, the work is to stay connected to that love. The love we each have for our churches and for our wider communities, both as they are and as they will be. The vision that calls out from the other side of the river, out beyond the wrestling, out where you will have a new name. It's not your vision. Or yours, or yours, or yours. It's not any one of our vision. And none of us, none of you can control it, as that would make it so much smaller than it actually is. It's love's vision. The same love and life that brought you this far is still doing its work on you and in your church and in this faith and in our greater world. Out beyond our control, our wills, our ideas, our analysis, our hopes or our fears, our bodies or our brains, love is creating, sustaining, transforming, healing, and calling us. Life is at work on life all the time. And we just have to let it in. Let go and let it in our churches, in our hearts, in our lives, in the world. Less muscle, more love. You'll forget. I totally forget all the time. It's okay. We just try again. Hanging on in the struggle long enough for the blessing to come, and then surrendering to the gifts of grace that await us in our letting go, with our hearts open through it all. Amen, and blessed be.